It's hard to talk about mockups without talking about Adobe Dimensions. This is Adobe's 3D program where you can craft all sorts of 3D models and put all of your designs on these 3D models, get the perfect lighting, the perfect background situation, and even do multiple items. So what we're going to do is we're going to first learn the very basics of Adobe Dimensions and learn its power. Then we're going to create a very simple project with assets that we've already created. So I'm going to provide these can assets and we're going to learn how to wrap it around a 3D model. Then finally we're going to do a polished add image, and we're going to do 4 different cans and stack them in a certain way where we get the right lighting, the right shadows, and we can know how to export our files into Photoshop so we can do some final editing in Photoshop. So hopefully we'll be able to produce this project by the end, and we're going to learn some very basic stuff with Adobe Dimensions. So let's get started. So welcome to Adobe Dimensions. If you've taken a few of my other courses where I talk a little bit about Adobe Dimensions and you already know the basics, feel free to skip the next 20 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of a crash course here with the basics, and of course Adobe Dimension has added a lot of upgrades and different features since the last time I've talked about it. So feel free to watch and see if you can learn something new, even if you're already familiar with some of the basics. So the first thing you're going to notice when you pop onto the dashboard is you're going to notice a couple of things. On the left are going to be a series of tools where you can rotate and move your 3D objects, and we'll go over the difference between a lot of these different tools because it can be a little overwhelming if you've never worked in the 3D space before. And we're going to talk about the X-axis, the Y, and the Z, and how it's really a lot more simple than you think. This is not a very intimidating 3D program. This is great if you've never worked in a 3D program before because it is so basic compared to something like a Blender or a Cinema 4D where there's thousands of 3D tools. This is very stripped down. You just have the toolbar on the left. You have some assets on this panel right here. And then you have a couple other options on the right about your canvas size and all of your different layers as well. So scene is basically setting the scene. This is all about setting 3D objects together to create all sorts of amazing scenes. And this is kind of the term that they use. But this is very similar to layers if you were in Photoshop. So this is kind of where all of your layers happen when you put in when you drag in a 3D object. So let's go ahead and drag in a cone. Just clicking and dragging, and so you'll see your cone pop up right there in the scene, and then you can go right into this arrow and it's going to allow you to edit that particular layer. So scene, layers, kind of very similar if you're used to the other Adobe programs. So let's drag in another 3D object and we're going to kind of see how this 3D space works. So let's just drag in a simple cube. So we're just going to click and drag and put it anywhere into the plane. So this is called the plane, everything that you see the gridded lines on. This is your main plane. So we're just going to pop it anywhere right here in the middle, and there's our cube. So immediately you are presented with this kind of series of different arrows and options and squares, and this is how we're going to scale our object, but we're also going to be able to rotate it and move it along the plane. So the very first thing is this little black dot in the middle. If you click and hold, you'll be able to scale it and move it along the plane, whatever plane that you have set. So that one's pretty straightforward. It's clicking on the center and you'll be able to move that object around. Then you'll notice a series of red, green, and also blue objects. And so the colors go with what plane or axes it's going on. So the blue will be the Z-axis, and the red will be the X-axis, and the green will be the Y-axis. So if I click on the top arrow, the arrows are going to be moving the object in the 3D space. So I can move it up. I'm going to click over here and slide it on the X-axis, and I can also click on the arrow and slide it this way. So think of arrows as movement up and down into the 3D space. So now we have the center object to be able to move it along the plane or the environment. And then we have the arrows that move it on the different axes. So up, down, left, right into the 3D space. And then lastly, we have rotating. So we can rotate our 3D object. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this Y arrow. I'm just going to move it up a little bit so I can kind of show you the cube rotating a little bit. So now the circles are for rotating. So you can kind of see how when I move over to the circles, you're seeing that 3D axes. So let's do X, click and hold, and you can rotate it along the X axis all the way around. And we can also do it on the Z, so it's going to do it this direction, and then also on the Y. So you can turn it around. So you can see with all of this combined, you can pretty much move your object around the entire space really easily by just using these controls right here. And another option I want to talk about is the squares. So we have the circles, which is rotating. We have the arrows, which is moving. But we also want to be able to scale it to make it smaller or bigger compared to other objects. So that's going to be your squares. So we're going to go ahead and scale it on the Z axis. And I'm just kind of moving my mouse left and right. And I'm able to scale it up and down. And I can scale it since it's a cube. It's going to scale the same no matter what axes I scale it on, lower or bigger and smaller. So let's try a different object. Let's bring in a torus, which I guess is pretty much a ring. And we can move this up, over, forward. So that was just using my arrows. And now we can move the entire thing around the plane like this by just clicking the center. And then the squares we know will make it bigger and smaller. And then lastly, we have our circles, which rotates the object. So it's not so intimidating once you practice which one is which. So circles are rotation, squares is scaling, and then arrows is moving. So let's do a little practice with multiple objects. Let's go ahead and delete that one. And let's drag in text. And this is something new to later versions of Adobe Dimensions, is being able to bring in the text. So if you don't see the text option, make sure you have an updated version of Dimensions. So it's going to bring in kind of your default type. And so one thing here, I can scale this by doing my square and make it smaller so I can see it. But what if I want to zoom out? I want to change the angle of my plane. I want to change basically the camera angle, if you want to talk about it that way. How do I do that? You're going to be able to do that by these three options right over here on your toolbar. You have a dolly tool, a pan tool, and an orbit tool, and these are very common terms in filmmaking. So the orbit tool, let's go ahead and highlight the orbit tool. We're going to talk about each one of these. So this is going to change your plane. So as we talked about, this is your plane. This is how you're setting kind of your background. So this is how we do, this is orbit. We're kind of orbiting around like we're orbiting, like we're the sun, orbiting around the typography. We can go up and down, get all sorts of great angles. Well, let's say I'm zoomed in quite a bit. I really want to zoom out here without having to make my object smaller or scale it smaller. So we're going to go ahead and grab this one right here, the dolly tool. We're going to be able to dolly forward, and I'm just clicking and holding my mouse forward and then clicking and holding my mouse backwards. And it's going to dolly out. And so I'm able to kind of zoom out and get all sorts of different angles for our presentation by using those two tools. And the one is the pan tool. So pan, I'm going to be able to move across and pan across the item. So between these three options, you'll be able to get any type of angle you want for your objects or your mockups. So we've talked about movement. We've talked about moving the specific object. We've also talked about moving the environment and the plane. So those are two kind of independent things when it comes to the 3D space, is the view, the camera angle, but then also the actual object position on the plane. So do the object position. So let's say I'm selecting these tools and I'm in and out, and now I'm ready to go back and change my object position or object size like we were in the beginning. Go up here to the select tool, or you could do the keyboard shortcut V and go ahead and click on the move tool. We're going to be able to get that selection tool back so we can move things around. So between these two, you kind of switch between the camera angle and you switch back between the move tool to get the right location. So let's change this typography here. So this is kind of your properties panel, right down here on the right side of any object that you select in your layers panel, or in this case it's called scene. So we have our text selected, and let's go down to text. Right now it has kind of a lorem ipsum default type, so we can just type in any old word. Let's just type in cat. Let's do it all uppercase. So there's C-A-T, cat. And so you have the same controls that you do over regular typography in Photoshop. So we can choose the specific typography. We could choose anything we have here. Let's choose something pretty chunky. And you can also change the leading and the spacing. All this is very similar if you're familiar with Photoshop. And right down here, you can change the size. So right now it's 13 centimeters. But if I hover over, you'll notice kind of a little arrow icon. When I hover over, there it is. What you could do is you can click and you can move the mouse to the left or right, or your trackpad or whatever you're using. And I'm going to click and hold and go left to make it smaller and go right to make it bigger. So this is kind of much quicker than having to manually type in the settings. So that changes size, and then we have depth. So depth is going to make it really deep. So it's going to kind of add that really thick characteristic to it. So let's do our camera angle. Let's get a different angle here. We're going to go over to orbit. We're going to orbit all the way around. We're going to see that thickness there. So I'm just changing my camera angle. And then I can go up to my move tool. And to get my settings, I'm going to click right here into the move aligned to surface. So it's going to align it to the surface. So now we can go back here to depth and kind of test our depth. Maybe not make it quite as thick. Maybe right about here. You have an extra option called bevel, and we can click that on to add a really neat beveled effect on that surface of the typography. So I'm going to zoom in here so we can see the details. See that how it bevels? And there's a lot of different bevel options. You have classic, round. And if you've ever played around with the 3D options in Photoshop, you'll recognize a lot of these bevel options. So let's stick with classic outline. That has a nice classy look to it. And we can also change the width. So we can make it really thin and subtle, or we can make it thick and chunky. So let's make it nice and thin. So just reducing our width. And we can change our angle, have it protrude outwards, or have it go right back in and be kind of flat. So let's just kind of keep it subtle and just have a little bit of an angle. So we can repeat it. So right now it's just repeated once. You have kind of one line that meets up. We can kind of zoom in so you can see. If I do repeat, it's going to add layers and layers of complexity to this. So I'm going to continue to add this, and you can see it added 2 lines, now 3, now 4, and it can keep going. And so it adds a little bit of detail. So let's do 4 for right now. And space, we can change the spacing so we can make a more exaggerated spacing. Let's use our dolly tool. We're going to dolly out because we're zoomed in way too much. We're going to dolly out, and then we're going to get our orbit tool because we want to orbit like the sun all the way around here so we can kind of get a better angle of what's going on. And then we want to zoom in. So let's get that dolly tool and dolly ourselves right in. So you're just going to have to get used to picking these 3 and figuring out, kind of getting used to panning in, zooming in, using that dolly tool to kind of get the right angle. So I can get my move tool, and this is where I can move it along the plane. This is great when you have multiple objects. So let's say I bring in I want to put this on a cube. So I'm going to bring a cube in. I'm just going to drag it in. Pop that cube on there. So let me see if I can zoom out. I'm going to select this cat. I'm going to move it up, forward, and let's do that orbit tool. So you can kind of continue to select. So let's say I'm right here. I want to be able to select this object. I need to go back to the move tool or press the keyboard shortcut V to then be able to place it. So you can see shadows give away an object's position, so it can kind of help you find out, okay, I want to center this on top of that cube. So let's scale this down a little bit and make cat a bit smaller. Let's scale it down a little bit more. I'm just going to put it right on top of this. And then move it. So just kind of practicing what does what. And let's change our camera angle. Get a more dramatic angle here. How about right there? Cat. To pan over just to make that a little bit more center. So there's our typography. We can always select, so let's say I want to change my bevel effects. What we could do is we can go up here to our text layer. Here's our text layer. Let's go ahead and title this cat. Once we select that in the scene, or this is really a layer, we can select that, and then we're going to get our properties, and we'll be able to go back down and change anything we need. So if we want to thicken up that bevel, we can. So this is where you can be really creative, getting some cool effects going on with our typography. So let's get our move tool and let's do some final positioning. We're going to go ahead and move it right back down so it's pretty much resting on the surface. There's two things that make Adobe Dimensions come to life. That's materials or textures, but also lighting. So those two things put together will make this plain gray 3D environment really come to life. So let's add some material or texture to this typography. So I'm going to go down here. You're going to be in your starter assets right here. And there's a couple things. Here's our basic shapes that we've been using. There's other different models that you can use that are already kind of stock 3D models, and you can also download some of these and import them in as well. We'll get to that in a little bit later. But these are kind of the default assets. We have a lotion bottle, which I did in another class where we kind of created a label and we're able to add it to the lotion bottle. And I got the stock lotion bottle right here by default. But you have laptops, all sorts of different geometric shapes. If you continue to scroll down, you're going to be able to see materials. So this is going to add the texture and certain material types. So we have plastic, wax, metal, glass. So if we wanted to have a plastic look to it, we can drag this plastic right onto the object. We're just going to add it right to it, and it automatically adds it. Or if we want to add, let's do some gold. I love gold. How about this one? Clean gold. We're going to drag this right into the 3D space. So it's going to make the entire thing gold. And right now it doesn't look that impressive. But once we go to rendering, which is right up here, this is kind of your render preview. Once you render something in a 3D environment, it's going to add so much more details and lighting, and it's going to look a lot better. This is really just kind of a preview environment. This is not really how it's going to look. It's just giving you a preview because rendering takes a long time. So it's giving you a general idea of what it's going to look like, but after you render it, it'll look a lot better. So just to kind of show you an example, I'm going to click over here in the top right. It's going to be Show Hide Render Preview. So we're going to click on this little icon, and it's going to kind of do a pre-rendering for us because a final render can take like 10 minutes. So it's going to give us an idea. So you've noticed how the lighting and the material looks so much more rich when you do a render and when you do a render preview. So sometimes I like to switch between the render preview and going back into the regular environment. So I'm going to go ahead and click back on this icon, and each time you make a movement, it's going to have to re-render it. So it's great if you kind of get to that final point, or if you want to kind of preview what a material really will look like. It's great to toggle on this kind of pre-render preview. But I'm going to click off because it's going to be a lot easier to kind of do the basics with that clicked off. But I just wanted to check and kind of see how that final material really comes to life. That's the fun part. And so what's great about some of the typography feature in Adobe Dimensions is it's got more than one surface. Because right now we have a side, we have a back to the typography. If we were to get our orbit tool and orbit around, it's got a back side, it's got a side, it's got a front side, it's got sides all the way around, and there's even these little bevels that are happening that we added. All these can have different materials applied to them. So if we go to our typography layer, we click on this arrow over here, it'll show all the different sides that we have. So we have the face, which is going to be what we see in front of us. the bevel, which is what we added, which is the little details, the back, which is the back side, of course, and your sides. So let's say I want to have a gold front, but I want to have a silver side. So I can go right here and grab the silver right over here in my materials, and I can bring it in. So what I'm going to do, if I were to bring this in and drag it over my object, it changes all four sides. But let's say I just want to change one side. I'm going to do Command Z and go back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the cat, go ahead and select the arrow, and I'm going to instead drag my silver over which one I want to drag it to. So let's say I want the side to be silver. So that's silver and that remains gold. I can make the bevel a different color as well. So we have all sorts of things to explore. Let's do something kind of different so we can see how it looks. Ooh, let's do rainbow. So we're going to take rainbow and we're going to make the bevel a rainbow. So we can kind of dolly in. And right now it doesn't look very impressive, but let's do a pre-rendering and see how all the final materials will look. So you can see how the side is silver, we have gold, and so we have all these different effects on here. Or we can have them all be the same color by just dragging it onto the actual object. So let's say I want the whole thing to be rainbow colored. I drag it right on top of the object. It's going to take all the different faces and sides and make it all that rainbow color. So let's go back to kind of a simple metallic. So I'm just going to kind of make all of these metallic. And so we can take off our pre-rendering because it's taken a lot of time to pre-render that. So I'm going to take that off. And I am going to dolly out. And I'm going to add something to the square. I'm going to do a pan so I can pan down and see the square. So let's say I want to try a different material for the cube. We could do a brushed metal, which doesn't look very impressive, but if you do a pre-rendering, you can see it gets a lot more complex and rich. We can do a clean gold, and that's how it'll render, which is really neat. This is what's so great about Adobe Dimensions. There's no way you can do this by hand in Photoshop. Some of the complexities of reflections. So I'm going to take my moving tools and get a better view of this. So I'm going to do a pre-render, so it's pre-rendering. Look at the reflection bouncing off the surface. It is so complex and realistic. It's just so rich. And it's just kind of that reflection and realism that makes a 3D program so much more superior than trying to hand draw all this in Photoshop or a drawing program. This is what makes 3D so quick and easy. And I can go down here and change it to anything I want. So if we just want to do one letter, we can change it. We don't have to have it just say cat. We could scale it up, which is our square. Anything is possible. So we can change our view of it by going up here to our three tools. So let's orbit around. And we can dolly in. So I want to do something a little different. Let's delete the typography. So I'm just going to select the M, or I can select the M up here and I can delete it. So I'm just going to press delete and it's gone. I want to start to do like a little bit of a mock-up here. And I have a fake business card in my files that I'm supplying to you. Right here, I have these two little business card fronts, something really, really simple for you just to have something to apply. So we're going to go back to our models. So we're going to go all the way up to the top, and we have our stock models that we could put on. And let's try to find a business card. So here is a business card set right here. So it says business card. Let's go ahead and drag this in. We're going to see if we can't just drag it on top of this object. So if we already have an object, it's going to go ahead and kind of show you where it could be preloaded. So let's do it right here in the middle and release. And there is our little business card. And let's take pre-rendering off so we can kind of zoom around this a little bit easier. So let's get a different view. Let's orbit and get a different view of our business card right about there. So how do we change the surface of this? So with pre-made stock 3D models, let's go over to our scene and go ahead and click on more. And so right now it has paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to this little option that says actions, and we're going to place graphic on the model. So here's our simple JPEG of a 3" by 2.5" business card. And we're going to go ahead and load this black version in. So we're just going to do the 0, 1 and load it in. And it's going to pop it in here. And we're going to get the move tool right here. We're going to need to move this into position. So here's where we can kind of angle this. So we're just kind of moving, taking this little circle, and we're able to rotate it. And this is how, remember how Square scales it bigger and larger? It's kind of the same for every kind of selection tool. Whenever you see a square, it's going to scale it. So what I want to do is I want to scale it dimensionally. So if I were to take this top square and bring it down, it's going to kind of not scale it dimensionally. So let's go ahead and go back. And I'm going to hold down Shift and then drag, and it's going to be able to scale it dimensionally. So I'm going to just scale it up so it fits a little bit better on the business card, and make it a little bit bigger, because it does seem like a non-standard business card stock model. It's not exactly 3.5 by 2, so I'm just kind of making up for that by making it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to release, and you're going to notice this has a lot of a shine to it, and we're going to talk about lighting next. So as you can see, it automatically added it to the front, but it also added it to the side. So if I was going to orbit around and change my view, you can kind of see how it's also on both sides. So how cool is that? How many different arrangements we can make with this very simple model. So look at the glare and the lighting, how it's changing, how I'm moving this around. Super cool. Let me change the material it's on. I think that's a little shiny. So I'm going to go down to my materials and add a little bit of a rougher texture there. So let's try, ooh, look at this bronze. That looks really neat. So I'm going to end up going with this glossy material. So I just kind of brought that right in, and I was able to use pre-rendering to kind of get a good idea of how that would look in the end. So I'm going to click off of pre-rendering, and we could try to find the right angle for this. So let's find the right position right about here. Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's dolly out just a little bit so we can see a little bit of the environment. And let's pan right in here. So there's another thing about lighting. So we've talked about how to set up two objects together, 3D space, how we're able to scale the object, how we're able to add an image on the object, but what about the lighting? That's the next really important thing that we need to master. So we're going to click on this arrow and go back to our scene, and this is where environment comes to play. So you have something called environment light, and this is going to change the lighting position. So with environment light selected, we're going to go down and you could change the intensity of the light and make it super bright or super dark. You can also change the rotation. So this is going to rotate. The lighting source is going to change, and this is the degree that it's changing. So we have like a negative change. It's going to rotate around your plane here, just around your environment. It's rotating around. And so this is where you really have to be careful, because you don't want to wash out your design. So if I were to do that, that's a high glare, and that's going to wash out the true color of the card. So we can rotate it so you have a little bit of that shine. So let's say it's a glossy finish. You want to have a little bit of that shine, but we don't want it to overwhelm the business card. So this would overwhelm it, and you just want a little hint of that glare and light. You never want your light to take over and make the design hard to read. So we can do the orbit tool. Let's orbit a little bit around here, just like that. So let's edit our business card a little bit. So we're going back into our scene layers, and we're going down to the business card stock. We're going to click on the arrow to edit more details. So we have the graphic that we loaded. Anytime you want to swap that out or delete it, you just highlight that layer and delete, and it's gone. And you can go ahead and go back down into your options, and you can load in a new updated graphic. But you can also change the properties of each layer on your 3D model. So this is your 3D model. You have a couple of layers here. You have the paper, which is the paper it's on, which is the business card 3D model, and you have the graphic that is put on top of it. It's basically an image or a JPEG just put right on top of that 3D model. So let's go to our graphic, and we can make this a metallic material. So we're going to go down to this metallic option, and we're going to slide it up. And you'll see how the lighting changes when I make it metallic. It's going to make it a little bit more complex, or we can not make it metallic. We can make it like a flat. You can increase the roughness, or you can make it really super shiny and tight, or you can make it really blurred. So this is all talking about lighting. We're making this reality with this program. So let's talk about rendering for a little bit. So now let's say we're ready. Let's do some last minute angles here to make sure we have the right angle that we want. Let's do our orbit tool and just make sure we are happy with how it's being presented. Let's do a little pre-render first. Let me pan and make sure that's in the center. So now we want to do a pre-rendering so we don't waste our time rendering. When we do a final render, it could take 5 minutes, it could take an hour, depending on the quality of your render. So doing a pre-rendering before you do a final rendering will save a lot of time if you feel like, okay, the shine is not there, or the material is not the material I'm looking for. So I really like the material of the business card. I think that works. I think the angle is great, but I think maybe the material can be a little bit more reflective. So let's go down to our materials and find a little bit shiny of a material. Let's do a silver, just dragging it onto our cube object. So now this is going to have a very reflective surface, and we are right here in our cube. So let's go to our scene. We're going to go into our cube, and we have the silver glossy selected, which is the material. We can change the roughness of this. So if we feel like that's too shiny, we can increase the roughness. It's going to dull down the reflection a little bit. You can add a patina, which adds kind of some scratches and some kind of roughness as well to the metal, so it's not just so perfectly smooth and slick. We can add scratches, scratch intensity. We can add luminosity. So you can see with just kind of adjusting some of these levels that we're able to really change the quality of the metal. And it's a little shiny, it's a little bright right there, so I'm just going to reduce the luminosity to where I had it before. So now that I'm happy with the overall render, I'm going to do a final rendering. So this is when we go up to the top here to render. This is how you do your final exporting of your file. You're going to do a real render. So it's do or die time. So it's going to kind of do a little bit of a preview for you once you slip into that rendering process. And so this is where we can do quality. So I usually do medium for my presentations, but if I were to do like a final portfolio piece or something where I really wanted to take the time to make it the highest quality possible, I can do high, but it takes hours. Usually the average image, it takes about an hour to do slow, and for medium it could take as little as 10 minutes. But the quality difference is big, so if you have a lot of time, really spend the time to do a nice rendering. If you do a medium render and you go, that looks great, go back and do a higher render to have that really nice polished look. But for time, we're going to stick with medium. We're going to title this business card. And you have two different export formats. You have a PSD file, which is a Photoshop file. So you'll be able to open this up in Photoshop and separate the shadows and the lighting and a couple of the layers, which is really nice to have, and it's what we're going to use for our project. But you can also just do a regular PNG so that you can put it in your portfolio and it's ready to go. Let's say you don't need to do any kind of post editing in Photoshop. You just want to have a final image to use. I always like to select both. So let's go ahead and render, and this is going to take a little bit of time. It's going to show you a tiny bit of a preview as it continues to render. So it'll probably be about 10 minutes or so, and it's going to render it, and I'll be right back. So we are done rendering, and we have our Photoshop and our PNG file. So let's double click and take a look at our PNG file, and we could take a look at our Photoshop file. So we can open up our Photoshop file. You can even change the background color on the Photoshop file, which is really nice if you wanted to change it to black. So you'll also notice how small it is. So this is 100%. It's only a 1080 by 1080 resolution. So that's not really great if you want to put it really big on Behance or some other portfolio building website. We really want to have a larger resolution. So by default, I really hate how Adobe Dimension has a very small resolution by default, but we can change that. So we can go back to design, and you'll notice here we have a 1024 by 768. So I apologize, that's the final resolution. So 1024 by 768. So how can we change this resolution and make it a lot bigger? We're going to go up to File, Document Settings, and it's going to go ahead and load in your Properties panel some options to change the size. So let's say we want to make this a lot bigger. Let's make it 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels. So that's going to essentially more than double the resolution we had. We can also change the resolution. Right now it's screen resolution 72, but we can change that to 300, and that's going to make it even better. And there's one more thing we have to do, because right now it's kind of, I don't even know where my environment is right now. Where is my stuff? There it is. It's way out there. So we can zoom in. But see, you'll notice that the artboard, I have to go right all over here and scroll over. See, the artboard is really zoomed in and big because we doubled the resolution. I want to be able to see the entire artboard without having to scroll like I am. So we're going to go up here to this little option where we can change the zooming properties of the canvas. And we're going to do a drop down menu, and we're going to just do, we could do 100%, 50%. Let's do fit canvas. And there we go. So now our whole artboard is seen, and it gives us a better idea of how to crop it. So we essentially double the resolution by just going up to File, Document Settings, going to Property, and then go ahead and change, double it, increase the resolution, and then of course get it to fit the canvas. That's all we did. We're essentially able to double it. I can zoom right back in, and I'm going to change the material because when I did a render, I wasn't super happy with the material, and that's okay because we can just go back to our cube, down to Properties, and change some settings here. Maybe we don't need quite as many scratches or patinas. Let's reduce the roughness. I just want it to be really shiny. I'm going to increase that luminosity, maybe increase the contrast, and have my pre-rendering on, so it's going to help me render all this for me. Okay, now let's go back to render. Let's re-render this again. This is going to show the old render that we did. It doesn't update until you re-render it. So let's re-render this. It's going to take probably just a couple minutes. I think the other one just took me a couple minutes. So I'll be right back. Looks a lot better now that we doubled the canvas size and the resolution. It looks a lot better. And we can double click our Photoshop and open it up in Photoshop. And once again, a lot more crisp and clear. We can even change the background color to anything we'd like. We have this as a separate layer now. So if we ever wanted to move this around and put it onto a different background or environment, which we can also do that in Adobe Dimensions, which we'll get to, but you'll have this as a kind of a separate layer to be able to place somewhere else. So this is the very basics of Adobe Dimensions. Now that we have the basics out of the way, let's do our first project. We're going to do this can design, and then we're going to kind of do work with lighting a lot more and doing some of the lighting tools that you see down here in your starter assets. So let's get started. I'll see you in the next lesson. Let's create this beautiful can presentation today in Adobe Dimensions. If you look at the downloadable resources as a part of the class, you'll be able to see all of these files here. And I have EPS files, which are basically vector files if you wanted to go in and edit a can design. I have them for all 4 flavors. We're going to do 4 different flavors: cherry, orange, lime, and blueberry. And I have all of them here available for you. So I'm going to open up one of these. Let's start off with blueberry, and we're going to bring this into Adobe Illustrator. Of course, you could use any other vector program that also reads .eps vector files if you don't have Illustrator. So this is kind of how you would normally set up a final can design. Let's say you have a client and they want you to do a can design. This is usually how you would design it. You'd have a front side, you'd have a back side. It would be all one graphic. It'd be all one PDF when you export it or vector file to the manufacturer. So this is how you would typically do product designs, as kind of one item that would wrap around a product. So it's a little bit different when using a 3D program to display something as opposed to printing something actually on a can. So what we want to do is we want to export this in a couple of different files so that we can create our can. So let's visit Adobe Dimensions and get our can ready for this label. So let's open up a brand new file, File New. And here we go. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the resolution on this so we go ahead and get that nice high resolution. So I can click right here on the numbers, or I can go back up to File, Document Settings, and then load kind of this properties option. So let's just do 2000 by 2000. This seems to be a nice round canvas size, and we can get that resolution to 300 pixels per inch. And I can go ahead and set my canvas so I don't have to sit there and scroll through my environment. I can go up here and fit canvas, and voila, we have a 2000 by 2000 pixel environment that we can work with. So the great thing about Adobe Dimensions is they have all these wonderful stock items, 3D models that you can use. If, let's say, you want to do something other than a can, you can visit stock.adobe.com and look at their 3D assets, and you'll be able to load any of these into Adobe Dimensions. Some of them are premium and some of them are free. So let's say we want to design, put a logo on a particular product, and let's say we want to put it on a keychain. This one looks like it's free. So let's see if we can click on it and do the license for free. So it's adding to my library, and I can easily load it in. Going up here to our arrow and then going to libraries. And I have it right here. I can drag it right into the 3D environment. So now I can zoom in and I can add a logo on top of this by going into my keychain and then adding right down here. Place graphic on model. So I wanted to show you how you have more than just the default ones. You can bring in 3D stock models. So let's go back to starter assets and bring in our standard can. So let's go down to beverage. We can do a beverage. There's 2 different beverages. You have one. Let's go ahead and bring this in. I might have to zoom out on this one. Oh yeah, definitely. So let's zoom out. You have one that shows the little droplets of water on the can, which has a really neat look. But we're just going to use the plain one for right now. So I'm just going to bring in the plain can. There's our can. Let's go ahead and find a really good angle here. So I'm just going to, I just panned. So it's right there in the center. And I think that's a pretty good angle, zoomed in pretty good. So let's add a label onto this can. So we're going to go over to our beverage can, and we're going to go over to the can. So this is the pull ring. This is going to be what you see on top. That's going to be that layer. So there's the pull ring, and this is going to be the can, which is going to be editable here. So let's go into can, extra options right over here, and we can add our image on top. So this is what is a little bit challenging. So let's say I'm in Adobe Illustrator and I have my final design that I sent off to the printer, and I have this as a designer ready to show. So let's say I just export this out. I'm going to export this as just a JPEG. Nothing fancy, we're just going to do a simple JPEG. So here's the issue when you have a 3D can in Adobe Dimensions. Let's say I go right here to place graphic on model, and I add my little image, which is the same image that I would send to a printer. Let's say I send it in a PDF format to a printer. This is the issue. So it's going to load on there. So there it is. I'm going to get my move tool so I can move this particular layer around. I'm going to hold down shift and scale it. So I'm just going to hold down shift and scale till it fits the can. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's perfect. I'm going to take my orbit tool and orbit around. That looks great. Why not you just slap on the label? This is what happens. Even though this is the right dimensions for a can design, it's not wrapping around very good as a default option. And if you go down here to properties, when I have my graphic selected, there's different kind of placements you can do. So this is a decal, so it's going to add it like an image right on top of a product. And you also have fill, which is going to fill it in across the whole can evenly. So you can see now it filled it in a lot better, but then now we need to zoom out on it. So let's click on move. Let's hold down shift and scale it down. And so you can scale it where it kind of repeats, but we want to be able to have it just go on it like this. So now if we go ahead and rotate around, so we're rotating around the product, and oh, though that's kind of weird. We have two labels there because it's repeating. So here's what we like to do instead. When we have a cylindrical product like this, we're going to do it a little differently. So let's take this off. Took it off. We're going to export this file differently, and I have this file for you if you want to move along with me, but I also have it saved as JPEGs for you so that you don't have to do this process with me. I'm just showing it. I already have these exported as 3 different assets. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to have these as separate PNGs because we want to add an image to the front and an image to the back and be able to move these as independent elements around the can so we don't have any of those problems that we ran into earlier. So we're going to go to File, Document Setup, and all I'm doing, and I already have these JPEG or PNGs exported for you already, so you don't even have to do this step, but I'm just going to show you how I kind of took a final design and then made it applicable to the 3D program Adobe Dimensions. So I found my halfway point and I just created an artboard and resized it. Now I'm going to go up to add a new artboard right here, and I'm going to just move this artboard over here. So now I have 2 artboards. I basically have a back and a front, so when I export it as PNGs, it's going to export both artboards for me at the same time, which will save a lot of time. So what I want to do is I want to just get the design. I don't want to get the background. We're going to add the background as another object later. So let's delete both background elements. So now we just have our design on the left and our design on the right. Let's go ahead and slide that in there. And we're going to go to File. I'm just exporting these as PNGs. Nothing too exciting. And so now we want to have the background. So let's go back to where we were and let's delete everything but the background elements. And now we're going to save this as a PNG or a JPEG. This is just going to be our background graphic. Export as. I'm going to click on Use Artboards, and let me just do a JPEG for this one because we don't need to have anything be transparent. Title this background. So now I have 3 different files that we need to build our can. So let's go back to Adobe Dimensions and load them all in. Let's start off with the background. Let's go ahead and go into our can. So we're in our beverage can, and let's go down to Can, More Options. Let's go ahead and place our background graphic. So place graphic on model, and let's do the can background. There's our can background, and we could stretch this to go all the way up, but I'm going to show you the problem that we're going to run into when we do the orbit tool and we orbit around. It's still having that issue. So to correct that issue and have it connect and be smooth, we're going to go down to our placement, and instead of a decal, we're going to do a fill. So now we can take our move tool, bring it down, we're going to orbit our object, and we have our background ready to go, and it looks smooth. So now we can add our front label and our back label as 2 separate images. So just like with layers in Photoshop, we can add layers of images on top of each other on this can. So we have a background, so we're going to title this background, and let's add another layer of images. So we're going to place our PNG of our front onto the can. So let's get our move tool right over here so we can see our controls. Hold down shift and scale it up right until we think it has a nice position. So there's our front. So let's do our orbit tool and orbit all the way around, and let's add the back. So let's add our next graphic, our back PNG. Get our move tool and scale it up till we get the right positioning. So here's where we have to go back into our background. We might just need to scale this down. And let's do our orbit tool and see how the front looks. So now these labels are independent. The front and the back are independent, and we can scale that as we need to. So let's orbit around and see if it's got some good spacing. So there's the front of our can, and what's great about doing it this way is we have a lot of flexibility here. So what I can do is we have this can object, and let me zoom out a little bit here. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this can. So I'm going to go back to my scene environment, and I'm going to go to beverage can. I have beverage can selected. See, I can move this all along the plane. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy it. So I'm going to edit, copy, and paste, or use your keyboard shortcuts, and I pasted a second beverage can in there. So we have beverage can 2 and beverage can 1. So we're going to take beverage can 2 and we're going to do our moving tools, and we're just going to move it away from it, the first object. And now we're going to rotate this. So to rotate, we're going to get our circles here, and we're going to want to rotate along the Y axis. So if you can see, the Y is the green. So let's go ahead and see how that looks like. Sometimes it's kind of hard to locate a particular axis, especially when it's at a particular angle, but I see it right here. There it is. You can kind of move around until it highlights, and you can spin it around. So we're going to show the back off right here. There's the back of the design. There's the front of the design. So we're kind of talking about presentation here. Let's dolly out a little bit and also pan and orbit. Try to find the right position for presentation. So now we want to place this onto something, onto a photo where the can is resting on some kind of surface. And so instead of creating our own surface like we did with the past project where we put it on a cube, we want to put it in a realistic photo. So I'm going to download from Pexels a photo of a table, but you can use any photo that you want for this. And I'm just going to delete this second can, and I have this can right here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of my lighting, my special lighting that it added for me automatically. I'm just going to select some of these lights and just delete. Just pressing my delete key, and we're just going to leave the environment light on. So let's talk about lighting. So now that we stripped away all the lighting it automatically added for us, we could talk about adding our own lighting by hand. So we're going to go down past the materials, and there's going to be something called directional lights and environmental lights. So with directional lights, we have different lights that are casted on the product. So you can have a light that is circular, you can have a light that is square in nature. So these are kind of like studio environments and studio lighting. So for example, I can bring in circle light onto our can, and you can tell the original source of the lighting source is circular in nature the way it does it. And so let me take off pre-rendering so you can see it a little bit better. And same thing with square light. If you were to drag square light on top of this, it's going to start to stack all these different light sources and make it more complex. And you can delete the one that we had originally with the circle light just like this. And let's delete both of these. I'm just kind of giving you an introduction on lights. Let's do a 3-point light. So if we drag this 3-point light in, you can see how nice and glossy that is. It's got 3 different light sources, a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. All these are individually edited. And we can go back to our can. Let's go back to more. Can background. I had a very high metallic shine to it. Let's reduce that a little bit to make it a tiny bit more realistic. It was a little too shiny. So just reducing the metallic. And you notice if I increase the roughness, so look before, it's almost like glass. And if I increase the roughness, watch this. It gets real soft, almost like a very smooth matte finish. And that's exactly what we want to have for our material for our can. So I just increase the roughness a little bit and reduce the metallic nature. We can even take our front. So this is the front, this is our little label right here. We can even add a little metallic properties to our front label. So now we want to duplicate our can a few times and add our different flavors, which will just be swapping out those JPEGs. So now that we have the lighting set, we have the material set, let's go ahead and make a copy. So I'm going to go back to our layers and our scene, and I'm just going to copy our beverage can. So Command C, Command V, or you can go up here to edit, copy and paste, and I just made a copy. So now I can go take my move tool, and let's take our arrow and just move it out here. So we're just moving it along the x-axis. And now we're just going to swap everything out. So we can go ahead and title this lime and title this berry and go ahead and start to replace everything. So I can go into my can and swap all of these out. So I'm going to go down to image, click on select a file. We have our JPEGs over here, and let's do our green. We are just replacing the background, so we're just going to swap it out. It's going to automatically do everything for us. And let's do the same thing for the back, and let's do the front. And let's get rid of these little decal images here. So front and back need to go. And let's hold down Shift and scale. And if we want to, we can rotate the object, and we can add a back label to it, just like we did with this one. And we would just add it the same way by adding a new decal image on top. So see decal placement. But for this, for our presentation, for our ad, we're only going to be showing the front of the can. So the back is not going to be a big deal. So we're not going to be placing that on here. So we're going to do the same thing, and let's duplicate our can. Copy paste, and we're going to slide along the x-axis, and we're producing another one. Sliding over here our canvas right down here, and let's replace this one. Can, background. Just delete that graphic and add our new one back on this. This is red front. Hold down Shift and scale. So it looks like we have one more left. Let's go ahead and copy over here. Copy, paste. Let's go ahead and fit this to canvas and slide it out. So there's our little cans. What we can do is we can rotate these individually to make sure they kind of all face the camera in the same direction. So I'm just going to select each one of these and kind of rotate them along, see the y-axis here. So I'm just kind of rotating the can, making sure they're kind of facing the same general direction. And just clicking, and let's see, there it is, rotate right about there. So now we have all four of those set. So what I can do, I can use the dolly tool and dolly out. I can select all four of these cans, so just selecting all four, cherry, lime, orange, and berry. And now I can get the move tool and get my center point here to move all along the plane or scale them all together. Let me see something that's a little bit hard to see. Let me see if I can't grab that. There it is. There it is. So now I can move it along the plane, and I can set this in any environment I'd like. And let me also move each one of these so they have similar spacing. So let's do a fun background for this. So let's go up to environment, and let's add kind of a gradient background. So I have a little gradient background that I found. It's going to go ahead and add it, and I can click on environment and go to match image and see if it can kind of change some of the lighting for me to match my fun gradient background. So you can see it kind of colorized it a little bit. It adapted some of the purple and added that into the light. And we can go to environment light if we want to reduce the intensity of the light coming in. Change the rotation. I'm going to go to key light, kind of reduce the intensity of that key light on the right side. Let's do a pre-render and see how everything's looking. So I think I'm liking how everything is looking. I can go to render now and do a final render. Let's take a look at the render and see how it looks. And there is the render in all of its glory. I can toggle off this rendered image to kind of darken those shadows a little bit. It kind of adds a little bit of the shadow casting here when I toggle this rendered image layer on and off. So I can edit this a little bit to kind of finesse this final image. What I can do is I can select a rendered image. I'm just going to sharpen it a little bit. Sharpen, and I could do a sharpen more, and that's just going to make it super crisp for presentation purposes. You don't want to have it to be too sharp, so sometimes you might just need to do just one sharpen and then go back and do some further sharpening manually by going and getting your sharpening tool and just sharpening certain areas. We don't want anything to look too sharp. We could swap out our background image, so we can toggle that background image off, and this is why having a Photoshop file rendered is so handy, because I can do any old background color. You can do it on black. Take any of these color samples, and voila, it's super easy to swap and change out. So let's take this another step further. I have this arrangement that I want to show you how to do, and we want to do a flat lay, but we also want to arrange this in a really cool way. So we're going to practice using our move tools. So let's go back to our design. Let's go ahead and save a different copy of this so we have all our different files. So we'll call this 4 cans in a row. Save that so we can have as many document files as we can. So let's arrange this a little bit differently. We are going to dolly out, so we can have a little room to kind of see what we're going to do. We're going to be doing that arrangement that you see here. We're going to kind of stack them in this arrangement as they are now, and then we're going to take all 4 cans and put them down onto the plane so we can cast the shadows there. So here's what we're going to do. Let's start off with orange, and I want to rotate him, so I'm just bringing him up. And I'm going to go to circle, circle is rotating, and I'm just going to rotate him down, all the way down to 90 degrees. Just like that. So he's perfectly perpendicular to the can. I'm just going to move him around just like this. Do the same thing with the green can, and let me go ahead and take pre-rendering off because we don't need to be pre-rendering right now. Let's rotate this the other way. What we're going to do with this one is we're going to rotate him all the way, I believe it'll be 180 degrees. So it'll be perfectly up and down. So now we have them all in a different direction. So this one's pointing left, right, up, and down. And now we can finally arrange these. I'm just doing the arrows. I'm gonna move blue into place. You can do any arrangement you like. This is just one I thought looked kind of neat. And bring final one in place. Up and in. So since I kept them all, I just moved them along the X and the Y axes. I did not move any Z movement. They all are aligned nicely. So I'm going to select all 4 of my cans. I'm going to move these around the X axis. And here is the trick. So now I have the overall arrangement. Let's just make sure I have it like I need it. So let me take Cherry. Just need to move him over a little bit. I might need to zoom in here. Make sure I have everything aligned right. Great. So now I can take all 4. So I want to move everything down flat. So I want to move it along, I'm going to rotate it along the X axis. So it's going to rotate it this way. And click and hold and see how it's rotating it. It's going to flatten it out. Right here, let's do a nice even 90 degrees. And so now we need to change our camera angle. So let's change our camera angle. Let's probably do some panning, or let's do some orbiting. So it's going to orbit around. There it is, orbit around. And now we need to zoom in. So now we're going to dolly in, dolly our camera in, and then finally pan it into the center. So we may need to just do some individual edits. So I'm going to select my lime, and I'm just going to kind of just do everything by eye at this point. So it's all about presentation. So you may have to just do your own little adjustments. So what I can do is I can select all 4 again, and I can rotate them. So instead of just being kind of up and down, let's add a little bit of a dynamic angle. So I'm just rotating everything along this y-axis and just kind of making it more dynamic. So what I want to do is I want to make sure these are flattened onto the surface. So there's a little trick here. Right here on Actions, it's called Move to the Ground. So it's going to move everything to that ground plane. So I'm going to go ahead and click it, and it moved everything down. So you see how the shadows changed? So I'm going to go back, see how the shadows, it's like floating. But now I'm going to ground it to the plane, and now everything is grounded, and then shadows have also changed in respect to that. And we can always change our lighting effects as well. So we've got an environment light, which is our main light source. We can change the intensity and the rotation. So right now the light is coming behind the can, but if we rotate it over here, we can have the light coming on top of the can, which kind of really helps to show off the design a little bit better. So we have key light. So that's gonna be where some of those main shadows are being cast. So we can have really tight shadows like this. But see how the light is kind of blocking the design? It's too strong, especially on the orange can. So you got to be very careful about where your light source comes from, where the design is never blocked by the light source. And I kind of like a tighter shadow, so I think I'm going to leave it right about. I don't want to have that orange can have too much of a shine to it. You can always change your intensity. And we could do the fill light. And this is a 3-point light system that we used. We don't have to use this particular light system. We can delete all these. And you can bring in the sun. So we can have a sun environment and just have like one simple light source. And there's also these environment lights, which give kind of a unique environment look to it. And this actually involves an image as well in terms of what shows up in the reflection. So you could do a low studio lighting. And remember, when you drag these in, it's starting to stack it. So sometimes you have to delete your prior environment light or it starts to get really complicated. Ooh, that looks really neat. That was studio backlight. And we even have some of these neon reflections too, so that's really interesting. Even do a forest, and what happens with these, what makes these different, so this is just lights. Environment lights adds another photo of reflection, so it's adding this photo right here of a forest, and it's adding that into the reflection, and that's what makes it a little bit different. So let's go back to what we had before with our 3 lights. I think that looked the best. And let's do a pre-render and see how it looks. And every time I do this, it looks different. So, because there's so many factors here. We have 4 cans, we have 3 different lights, we have an environment light, we have all these different factors at play. Every time I do it, it's just a little bit different. And that has more kind of a sunset evening look to it than the one I did as a sample when I was planning the class. So this is the one I did planning the class, and this is kind of how it's looking now. Okay, so I think I'm ready to render this guy. And I wouldn't mind adding one more light source. Let's do a square light. There we go. I just think that adds a little brightness to the product and adds complex lighting. So let's go to render. Let's render this. And I'll see you in 5 minutes. So let's bring it into Adobe Photoshop. So opening up the Photoshop file, I want to add kind of a dynamic background to this. So I want to go ahead and kind of frame this or crop this a little bit, just so we don't have too much excess background. I want to have like a nice Instagram post size. So just doing a very rough guesstimate. So I want to go ahead and sharpen this. So I'm going to sharpen my rendered image. And I want to put this on a really cool background. I'd love to bring out the color of each can to really tie in that thematic color scheme. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to manually draw some shapes, or I can just get the rectangle tool. I need to lock my can layer so I don't accidentally move it. And just going to be able to make a cool square background here. So I'm just going to duplicate that layer and do the same thing and make this one orange. Do the same thing and make it red. I love how the shadows just adapt so nicely to the background. So I'm just kind of combining these in the best way possible. So I'm going to bring this down and make the last one green. So now I just need to arrange them so that one color is not more dominant than the other in that center area. So let's add one more layer of complexity. Let's add a little bit of this bubbleness because it's a seltzer soda, so it's got this carbonation to it, and we really don't want this to be flat. No pun intended. We really want to accentuate the product's bubbly characteristics. So let's bring in some bubbles of some sort. So I have this image I thought would be perfect. I found it on Pexels, and I'm going to provide a link to this for you. To bring this into Photoshop, just simple bubbles. We're just going to get a little bit of the background texture and use a blending mode to really bring that about. So I'm just going to bring this in, the top layer, reduce that down a little bit, center it. I'm going to bring this all the way down just where it's below the cans but above the colors. So below the cans and above the colors. And I'm going to do a blending mode here. I'm going to do luminosity because what it's going to do, it's going to automatically adapt to the color below the image. So we're going to do luminosity, and we're going to back off the opacity a little bit. We just want to have a subtle bubble flavor and maybe even sharpen it. So everything's nice, sharp, and crisp. And we can always individually edit images. So this is the image here. We can even intensify or drop shadows more. We can add another layer here, call this a shadow layer. And we can paint on some deeper, darker shadows. So I'm just going to paint on black with my soft round brush, maybe just a little bit more opacity here, maybe 20%. I'm just going to make those more intense shadows here. There we go, not too much. And we can edit our main image. So this is our main image that we brought in. Let's unlock that. We can right click and make it a smart object. Now that it's a smart object, I can go up and do some adjustments and be able to go back and change it. So we can go to exposure. This is just kind of like some post-production edits. Just adding any old thing that we need, like the lighting. That adds, reducing the offset kind of adds a deeper, richer color to it. And we can also go up to vibrance if we want to add a little bit pop of color. So now you can really see that with the can color. Okay, so we're ready to save this. So we're just going to save this as a JPEG. And we are done. We're ready to upload this to our portfolio. We got a couple different items that we created using this. We put it on in an environment. We could put it on any stock photo that we find. We could put it in any, maybe a photo that we've taken, and put our can on there in a 3D environment, which is really neat. And we can line things up, have multiple products, multiple flavors. I think this Adobe Dimensions is so powerful that you can do this fairly quickly. I mean, in an hour, you can apply a finished JPEG onto a rounded 3D model, change the lighting, add a background, and you can have a really stunning looking advertising image that you can use. Hopefully you've enjoyed this quick dive into Adobe Dimensions. There's so much more you can do with this program in terms of setting up entire 3D environments. You could do 3D art. You can do entire brand presentations here by using some of the simple shapes and applying an image on them just like we did the can. You can download other different 3D models or create your own 3D model to import and be able to apply everything with such stunning amount of realism, wonderful realistic lighting, and great materials. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. We created a pretty neat presentation, and we can keep going, but I wanted to stop here because I think this is a great stopping point for you to stop and do a little student project. I want you to do your own can design, export a JPEG, and put it on a model and put it on in a photo environment. So you can download any photo, a photo of a table, a photo of just any environment that you want to place your can on. I want you to be able to do that. If you want to use the same design that I have, you can definitely borrow my design in the downloadable files. But I do want you to practice putting it on the can and also putting it in an environment. So I can't wait to see your student projects and what you've learned and apply it to real world stuff.